I had seen him last when he was barely out of high school. Skinny, awkward, always lost in some video game or argument with his mother. Back then, he was just her son. Someone who didn't really exist in my world beyond the polite greetings exchanged in kitchens over coffee. But this time, when I opened the door to my friend's house and saw him standing there, taller, broader, his presence heavier, more deliberate, I felt something shift under my skin. It wasn't his face, though. It had matured, sharpened around the jaw, softened near the eyes. It was the way he looked at me, as if he remembered me not as a friend of his mother's, but as someone worth noticing now. He smiled first, and I responded automatically, though my chest tightened with something I couldn't name. My friend greeted me with her usual light chatter, but my attention kept slipping. I noticed how he leaned against the kitchen counter, how his forearm muscles tensed when he reached for a glass, how his voice had dropped into something low and dry. He didn't speak much that evening, not directly to me, but every time I looked up, he was watching, not staring, just watching like he was trying to learn something about me I didn't realize I was giving away. Dinner was casual, familiar, filled with the sort of recycled stories old friends share when they run out of real things to say. He stayed mostly quiet, responding with smirks or half-lies that landed just a little too sharply. My friend didn't seem to notice, but I did. I noticed everything. The room felt warmer than it should have. I kept adjusting the neckline of my blouse, aware of the fabric against my collarbone. At one point, I excused myself to the bathroom just to splash cold water on my wrists. I stared at myself in the mirror and didn't recognize what I was trying to hide. When I returned, they were finishing dessert, and he stood to help clear the plates. He reached for mine before I had a chance to pick it up, and his fingers brushed mine, just lightly. Just enough to make me forget what I had planned to say next. After coffee, I stood to leave. My friend was talking about some weekend plans, something casual. I nodded, offered hugs. As I reached the door, he stepped behind me, opened it before I could touch the handle. "Careful driving," he said, close enough for his voice to feel like heat against my neck. I turned slightly, searching his face for mockery, for playfulness. But he wasn't smiling. His expression was unreadable, almost indifferent. Then he added, "Shame you live so close. Makes things more complicated." And with that, he stepped back, leaving the door open, his eyes finally looking elsewhere. In the car, my hands trembled slightly on the steering wheel. I told myself it was nothing. Just a young man trying to be clever, testing boundaries that didn't exist. But that night, when I undressed in the bathroom, I found myself looking at my own body differently. Not critically, not even curiously, just with a certain attention I hadn't felt in years. I brushed my fingers over my collarbone the way I'd seen his eyes do earlier. I opened my underwear drawer and paused, staring at the white lace I hadn't worn in months. Something stirred in me. Not a memory, but something closer to anticipation. My husband was already in bed, half asleep, reading something on his tablet. He looked up, smiled briefly, then turned back to the screen. I lay beside him, silent, still half-dressed. He didn't notice. Or maybe he did, and chose not to ask. That was how we worked lately. Gentle, polite avoidance of things we couldn't quite name. In the dark, I replayed that moment at the door. His voice close to my ear, the pause before his words. I knew he would be around. I knew I would see him again. And I also knew, though I tried not to admit it, part of me wanted that more than I wanted anything else in weeks. As I turned on my side, facing away from my husband, I pressed my thighs together slowly, subtly. It wasn't desire exactly. It was the aftertaste of being seen. And that, I think, was what I had been missing all along. I didn't plan to see him again so soon. The thought had lingered since that evening, drifting into the quieter corners of my days. While folding laundry, while cooking dinner, even while brushing my teeth with my husband standing beside me. It wasn't the kind of thought I welcomed. It felt like static beneath the surface, like the low hum of a light left on in another room. But life, in its quiet cruelty, seems to sense when something inside you is shifting. It was a Tuesday. I remember because it was laundry day. I'd left the house dressed carelessly.
Cotton dress.
No makeup, hair pulled back into something loose and forgettable. I stopped by my friend's place just to return a baking dish. I didn't plan to stay. I didn't even knock at first. Just let myself in through the back door the way I always had. She wasn't home. The house was still. I hesitated in the hallway, dish in hand, ready to leave it on the counter and slip back out unnoticed, but he was there. I hadn't heard him. He appeared suddenly at the edge of the kitchen, barefoot, holding a coffee mug, eyes still sleepy. "Hey," he said, voice rough from waking. "Didn't hear you come in." "I was just dropping this off," I replied quickly, lifting the dish slightly, as if that explained everything. He stepped into the kitchen, leaned against the counter. His t-shirt clung in places that made it hard to keep my eyes where they belonged. He looked like he'd just gotten out of bed, not dressed for guests. And for a moment, I felt foolish standing there. Married, nearly twice his age, holding a dish like some suburban cliché. "You want coffee?" he asked. I should have said no. Every part of me knew that, but I nodded. He moved slowly. Unbothered, I stood at the edge of the kitchen, arms crossed, pretending not to notice how close he stood as he poured. He handed me the cup, our fingers brushing again. This time, the contact didn't feel accidental. It lingered. We didn't sit, just stood there, facing each other in the quiet of that too familiar kitchen. I sipped the coffee. It was strong bitter. I didn't mind. "Wasn't expecting company," he said, studying me. I wasn't planning to stay. "You always that spontaneous?" I raised an eyebrow. "Are you always this comfortable walking around half-dressed?" He grinned. "Depends on who's watching." That silence again, not awkward, something heavier. His gaze moved from my face to my collarbone, then lower. I felt the air shift between us, dense and still. "I should go," I said, but I didn't move. He set his mug down. "Should you?" I stared at him. I wanted to say something dismissive, something light enough to float out of the room, but nothing came. He stepped closer. One step, then another. My back touched the edge of the kitchen counter, the coolness of it shocking against my skin through the thin fabric of my dress. He didn't touch me, just stood in front of me too close. "I've thought about you," he said. The words hit harder than they should have. He was young, bold, reckless. Maybe, but there was no arrogance in his voice. Just honesty. And that undid me more than anything else could have. I didn't answer. I couldn't. His hand lifted almost lazily, and he touched my jaw. Not possessively, just the back of his fingers grazing. My skin burned where he passed. Then it happened. He leaned in slow enough that I could have stopped it, pulled away, laughed it off. But I didn't. I tilted my head, without thinking, eyes fluttering closed before his mouth reached mine. The kiss wasn't soft. It wasn't hesitant. It was heat, sudden and consuming, like striking a match and watching it catch before you can think. My hands didn't know where to go. One found his chest. The other gripped the edge of the counter. I tasted coffee and something else. Something urgent, something younger than I remembered feeling. It lasted seconds, maybe longer. I pulled away first, breath caught in my throat, heart racing. "I can't," I whispered. But I didn't move. He looked at me, eyes darker than before. "You already did." A sound outside. Footsteps. Maybe a car door. It snapped the moment in two. I stepped back, nearly knocking the dish over. Set it down too hard on the counter. "I have to go," I said again. My voice shook, and I hated that he could hear it. He didn't stop me, just nodded. "Slow. See you around." I left the house without looking back. Got in the car, gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles widened. My pulse was everywhere. In my ears, my throat, the space between my legs. Back home, I threw my dress in the hamper like it had betrayed me. I changed into something dull, something soft. I moved around the house like a ghost, avoiding my reflection. My husband came home later than usual. He kissed my cheek. I flinched. He didn't notice or pretended not to. That night, when he reached for me in bed, I let him. His hands were familiar, his rhythm known. But I lay there staring at the ceiling, trying to silence the memory of another hand, another mouth, another presence. When it was over, I said I was tired. He turned over, content. I curled away from him, holding a pillow to my stomach like it might stop the ache. I didn't cry. I didn't feel guilt. Only a strange kind of fullness, like something had broken open inside me. And I wasn't ready to seal it shut. It wasn't just a kiss. It was a beginning. And I knew I would let it happen again. I thought ignoring it would be easy, that I could tuck the memory into some quiet, unreachable corner of myself and carry on like nothing had shifted. I'd done it before. Buried disappointments, unmet needs, even silent resentments. It was practically muscle memory by now. But this was different. The kiss had etched itself into my skin. I could still feel the shape of his mouth on mine, the press of his fingers near my jaw. I could still taste him in the mornings, still sense him in the heat that bloomed under my clothes when I caught a glimpse of my reflection. I tried to push it away. I told myself it had been a mistake, a fluke, a foolish indulgence that meant nothing. And yet, I found myself hesitating when I passed a street, slowing down, watching for his car, wondering if he remembered it the way I did. Sharp, electric, dangerous. For days, I avoided my friend's house. I declined her invitations, faked headaches, claimed errands. She didn't question it. She was too distracted by her own plans, her work, her endless chatter about renovations and vacation bookings. But I knew I couldn't keep it up forever. I would have to face him again. Pretend or not pretend at all. It was almost a relief when I ran into him somewhere else entirely. Neutral ground. The local community center, where I volunteered twice a month for a literacy program. I just finished a session and was packing up when I saw him in the hallway talking to someone near the entrance. He wore a jacket over a dark shirt, jeans, his hair slightly tousled. He looked ordinary, approachable, and yet every part of me lit up at the sight of him. He saw me. Our eyes met. He didn't smile. I turned away quickly, pretending to be busy with the stack of papers in my hands. I could hear his footsteps approaching before he spoke. "Volunteering now?" he asked casually. I glanced up. "Always have." He leaned against the door frame, arms crossed, watching me with that same unreadable expression. "Didn't expect to see you here." Likewise, a beat of silence. Then, "I left something for you." I frowned. "What?" He pulled a folded piece of paper from his jacket and set it on the edge of the table. "Just a question. Nothing more." I didn't reach for it. I watched his fingers instead. How they lingered against the wood for a second too long. "You could have texted," I said, trying to sound indifferent. "You blocked me," he replied without bitterness. "Just fact." I didn't answer. He stepped back, eyes still on mine. "Take care." And then he was gone, leaving behind only the faint trace of whatever cologne he wore. Clean, sharp, slightly metallic. I waited a full minute before picking up the paper. It was simple. His handwriting, hurried but legible. "If I asked to see you again just to talk, would you say yes?" No name, no time, no pressure. I folded it carefully and slid it into my purse, heart pounding like I'd just committed a crime. All the way home, I told myself not to respond, that I had already gone too far, that it had to stop. But that night, after my husband had fallen asleep beside me, breathing slow and even, I pulled out the note again. I read it in the soft glow of my bedside lamp, and then I found myself writing a reply on the back almost without thinking. "Yes, once. That's all." I didn't sleep well. My dreams were crowded with disjointed images. His face too close. My husband's voice calling me from another room. The sound of paper tearing. When I woke, I felt hollowed out, like something had been scraped clean inside me. I slipped the note into an envelope and dropped it in the mailbox near his building on my morning walk. I didn't wait for a response. I didn't know if he would even find it. I told myself I didn't care. 2 days later, I received a message through a mutual acquaintance, someone from the center, someone unaware of what they were delivering. A simple reminder, he'll be at the cafe near the park on Friday around 4, just in case he wanted to drop by. I shouldn't have gone. I knew that. But the day arrived and I found myself standing in front of the mirror trying on a blouse I hadn't worn in years. Soft cream fabric, low collar, sleeves that hugged my arms. I chose earrings that dangled slightly when I turned my head. I wore perfume I usually saved for anniversaries. By the time I walked into the cafe, my stomach was tight with nerves, but my hands were steady. He was already there, seated at a small table near the window, coffee in front of him, his phone untouched. He looked up as I approached, and for the first time, I saw something different in his expression. Not mischief, not confidence, but something closer to gratitude. "Hi," I said, slipping into the chair opposite him. "You came?" I said I would. He nodded, watching me. "You look different." "Good. Different." He smirked. "Very." The conversation started awkwardly. We talked about meaningless things. How the town had changed, the weather, his temporary job at a design firm. But beneath every word, the air between us pulsed with unspoken truths. Every time he leaned forward, I felt my breath catch. Every time his knee brushed mine under the table, I lost the thread of my own sentences. He didn't mention the kiss. Neither did I. But near the end, as I reached for my coat, he said, "You know, you never answered the second question." I froze. "What second question?" He held my gaze. "Would you want it to happen again?" I stared at him, heart hammering. "I didn't ask it out loud," he added. "But I think you heard it anyway." I stood slowly, smoothing the front of my coat. "And what makes you think I didn't already answer?" He tilted his head. "Because you're still here." Outside, the late afternoon sun painted the pavement gold. The air was cool, but my skin burned beneath my blouse. I walked home without stopping, without looking back. That night, I stood in front of the mirror again before bed. I touched the earrings, still dangling from my ears. I slipped off my blouse, folded it carefully, and placed it back in the drawer like a secret. My husband called from the bedroom, asking if I'd turned off the downstairs lights. I said yes, though I wasn't sure. I got into bed beside him, still wearing the scent of that cafe, still hearing the echo of a question I had answered, not with words, but with the fact that I had shown up. And I knew I wasn't going to stay away. I didn't tell him I would come. There was no message, no confirmation, no excuse prepared if I changed my mind. And yet on Saturday morning, while I was still loading the dishwasher in the kitchen, I was already thinking about what I'd wear. The thought came uninvited with the same familiarity as checking the weather or wondering if we had enough milk. Natural, fluid, dangerous. The truth is, I hadn't stopped thinking about him since the cafe. His question hadn't left me. It hung between my thoughts like a fog, obscuring things I used to see clearly. I moved through my routine like a well-programmed version of myself. Laundry, errands, polite conversations with neighbors. But beneath it, something stirred. Not guilt, not shame. Just the growing ache of anticipation. By noon, I stood in front of my closet, unsure whether I was dressing for myself or for him. I chose white, a blouse I hadn't worn in years. It felt too soft, too light against my skin. I paired it with tailored jeans, low heels, and a coat I only wore when I wanted to feel seen. Not noticed. Seen. I told my husband I was meeting a friend for coffee. He didn't look up from his laptop. He asked if I'd be back by dinner. I said I wasn't sure. The cafe was further out this time, not our usual spot, not even close to where we lived. A neutral place. A little upscale, quieter. I walked in and found him already seated, 2 cups in front of him. He didn't smile right away, just looked at me slowly from head to toe, then back to my face. That look lingered in my chest. "You wore white," he said. I sat down. "You asked for it without asking, and you answered without saying a word." He reached for his coffee. I watched the movement of his hands, remembered the way they had gripped the edge of the counter last time. We talked for a few minutes, casual things as always, just enough to pass for harmless. But his leg brushed mine beneath the table, and neither of us moved away. It wasn't planned what happened next. Or maybe it was. Maybe both of us had quietly agreed somewhere in the silence that the moment had already arrived long before we admitted it. He stood first, said he wanted to show me something. A local gallery nearby, some pop-up event, he claimed. I followed, not because I believed him, but because I wanted to. The walk was short, just around the block. But every step made my breath shallower. He didn't touch me, didn't look at me more than necessary, but I could feel the tension rising like static between us. The gallery was closed. He paused in front of it and glanced at me with a hint of a smirk. Well, that's disappointing. I leaned against the wall, folding my arms. You knew it would be. Maybe. A long silence. Then he took a step closer. Just one. His hand reached out, brushing a strand of hair away from my cheek, and lingered there. His thumb grazed the line of my jaw. Slow, deliberate. I didn't stop him. I don't want to be careful, he said. I whispered. Then don't. The kiss wasn't rushed this time. It built slowly, like something remembered rather than discovered. His mouth found mine with certainty, but no urgency. My hands went to his chest, fingers curling against fabric. I felt everything. His breath, his pulse. The heat between us that didn't ask for permission anymore. We didn't speak. There was nothing to say that wouldn't make it smaller than it was. Afterward, we walked back toward the cafe. I stayed close but didn't touch him. My heart thudded like I'd been running for miles. He glanced at me once, just once, and I could tell he felt it too. Not just the heat of the kiss, but the weight of what it meant. I got in my car, drove home. The white blouse still clung to my skin like a reminder. At home, the air felt stale. My husband had set the table, lit candles, even poured wine. He smiled when I walked in, proud of his gesture. I thought we could have a proper dinner, he said. It's been a while. I stood in the doorway longer than I should have. I felt the contrast like a slap, the warmth of his effort, the softness in his voice. I wanted to feel something. Gratitude, affection, even guilt. Instead, I felt hollow. I changed clothes before sitting down, wore something less fitted, washed the scent off my wrists. He told me about his week, work troubles, upcoming meetings. He asked me questions, listened when I answered. When he touched my hand across the table, I let him. After dinner, we cleared the plates in silence. He stood behind me at the sink, wrapped his arms around my waist. I stiffened just slightly. He kissed my neck, murmured something about missing this. I forced a smile. Me too. We went to bed early. He reached for me again. This time, I responded. I kissed him back, let him undress me slowly. I thought maybe I could bridge the gap, pretend the world hadn't tilted. But I couldn't stop comparing. His mouth to another, his rhythm to a different beat, his hands that knew my body so well they no longer asked permission. I lay awake long after he fell asleep, tracing invisible lines on my thigh. The room smelled like our history. Shared sheets, old routines, clean laundry. I missed the unfamiliar. And for the first time, I stopped trying to convince myself it was wrong to want it. The truth was simpler than that. I needed it. Not the thrill, not the secrecy. I needed to feel alive again. And he had touched that part of me like it was the only thing worth saving. I closed my eyes and didn't dream because I was already living it. There are mornings that come soft and empty, like a clean sheet before the first word is written. That Monday was one of them. I woke before the sun rose, the sky still a bruise of blue and gray. My husband stirred beside me, but didn't wake. I watched his back rise and fall and wondered how many versions of me he believed he truly knew and how many he never noticed slipping further away. He was still asleep when I stepped into the shower. I stood under the hot water longer than necessary, letting it sting my shoulders, run down my chest, my thighs. I pressed my forehead against the tile and thought about the way I'd kissed someone else outside a closed gallery 2 days earlier. Thought about how much I wanted it again. Not the moment itself, but the way it made me feel. Undeniable. Back in the bedroom, I opened my underwear drawer and hesitated. I didn't reach for the usual cotton or beige lace. I pulled out something different. A deep red set, silk and barely there. It wasn't for comfort. It was a decision. I dressed carefully that morning, more deliberately than I had in months. A black skirt that hugged my hips without apology. A fitted top that left my collarbones bare. A coat thrown loosely over my shoulders. He'd asked me once, quietly, almost teasing, what perfume I used. I wore it now, not for the question, but for the memory of his voice when he asked. I told my husband I had errands. I kissed his cheek in the hallway. He smelled of shaving cream and orange peels. He smiled like a man who still believed in ordinary days. The meeting place wasn't romantic. A rest stop off the highway, 20 minutes out of town. He had suggested it casually in a message the night before. There's a small exhibition at the Heritage Museum. Could be a good excuse. I knew it wasn't about the art. When I arrived, his car was already there. He leaned against it, hands in his pockets, sunglasses pushed up into his hair. He looked too young and too sure of himself all at once. And I hated that my body reacted before my mind could even catch up. "You came?" he said, stepping forward. "Of course I did," I answered. Inside the museum, we moved through rooms of old farming tools and historical photographs. We barely looked at them. We were just two people pretending to occupy time, walking through a space neither of us cared about, holding ourselves back with every breath. He didn't touch me, but I felt it building. The silence between words, the quick glances, the way his body always seemed just an inch closer than it should be. In the final room, a small video installation played on loop. A film about old train routes, the kind people rarely watch. We stood in the far corner out of view. I said something about the soundtrack. He said something about missing the point. And then, without warning, he turned to me. "This is driving me crazy," he said low, firm. "I think about you all the time." I swallowed, felt the floor tip slightly beneath me. "You shouldn't. Neither should you," he said. "But here we are." I didn't answer. I just stepped closer.
He didn't ask.
I didn't hesitate. The kiss this time was different. No curiosity, no question. It was heat and hunger, months of restraint unraveling at once. His hand slid under my coat, fingers brushing the curve of my back, then pressing firmly into the space just above my hips. I kissed him harder than I meant to, like I wanted to erase the distance between who I had been and who I was becoming. He pulled back first, breathing unevenly, forehead resting against mine. "If we keep doing this," he whispered, "you're not going to want to stop." "I already don't," I said. We stayed there for a moment, just breathing. Eventually, we left the museum, not saying much. Outside, the wind had picked up. My coat whipped open slightly, and I let it, not caring who saw. Back in the car, I sat with my hands in my lap, staring out the window. He drove slowly, one hand on the wheel, the other resting close to the gear shift, close to my knee. At a red light, he finally spoke. "Let's go somewhere next weekend. Just a day out of town." I turned to him.
"Why?"
"Because I want to be with you without pretending it's something else." I didn't answer right away. My mind spun with the logistics, the risk, the stories I'd have to tell. But my heart had already said yes. That evening, my husband was waiting for me on the porch. He held a wine glass in one hand, a new novel in the other. He asked how my day was. I said it was long. He kissed my forehead and told me dinner was almost ready. We ate by candlelight again. He told me he was proud of how involved I'd become in the community. He said I looked beautiful in black. I smiled. Later that night, he reached for me in bed. I let him. His hands moved slowly, carefully. I responded just enough. I made the right sounds, kept my body warm beneath his. But inside, I was somewhere else entirely. Back in that dim gallery corner, feeling silk press against my skin, tasting a different mouth, hearing a different voice say my name like it mattered. Afterward, I curled into myself and stared at the ceiling. I didn't cry. I didn't feel guilty. I only felt awake, and I knew that next weekend I would go. In the days that followed, I behaved exactly as I was expected to. I made dinner, folded towels, answered emails. I scheduled a dental appointment, picked up dry cleaning, filled the bird feeder in the backyard. If anyone had asked, they would have said I seemed content. Even my husband commented on it over breakfast one morning. Said I seemed lighter, more present. He smiled when he said it. I smiled back. I was becoming skilled at wearing comfort like a second skin. But inside, I was somewhere else. I was in that hallway again with his mouth on mine, his fingers against my spine. I was in the passenger seat of his car, watching trees blur past as we drove toward nothing in particular. I was inside a secret, and the longer I lived in it, the more it began to feel like the only place where I was truly myself. I hadn't confirmed anything yet, but I knew I would go with him that weekend. It wasn't about escape. It wasn't rebellion. It was clarity. I had found a version of myself that I didn't recognize, and I didn't want to let her go. But even as I planned for what was coming, I told myself I had to make things right at home. Or at least appear to. I offered to make dinner reservations for Saturday night, knowing we wouldn't keep them. I told my husband I might visit my sister in the city. He nodded, distracted, not pressing for details. I wondered if deep down he sensed something, but if he did, he buried it quickly. On Thursday, I saw her, his mother, my friend. She'd invited me for lunch, casual as always. She talked about the usual things. Her workload, an upcoming trip, a recipe she wanted to try. She didn't mention him, not once. But he was in every corner of that house. His scent still lingered faintly on the couch pillows. A pair of his shoes sat by the back door. His voice echoed in my memory, and I caught myself glancing toward the hallway more than once. She offered me coffee. I accepted. My hands trembled slightly as I lifted the cup. I told myself it was just caffeine. Before I left, she walked me to the door and asked if everything was okay. Her voice had changed just slightly. Not suspicious, curious, maybe even gentle. I smiled too quickly. Of course, why wouldn't it be? She tilted her head and studied me for a beat too long. Then she said, "You look different lately, like you're thinking a lot." I laughed, forced. Maybe I am. She touched my arm lightly. Thinking can be dangerous. I left her house feeling exposed in a way I hadn't expected. The entire drive home, her words ran through my mind. Thinking can be dangerous. She didn't know anything. Or maybe she did. Women have a way of sensing shifts in the air, even when they can't name them. That night, I packed a small bag. I told my husband again about my sister. I kissed him goodnight and lay beside him in the dark, eyes wide open, heart pounding against the mattress. The next morning, he left early for work. I waited 15 minutes after the door closed before I dressed. I wore the same red lingerie, a dress he hadn't seen before. Low heels, a touch of makeup I hadn't worn in months. I didn't look like myself. Or rather, I looked like a version of myself I had buried long ago. He picked me up at the edge of town. We didn't speak at first. We just drove, windows slightly open, wind in our hair. The radio played something soft, forgettable. Halfway to the next city, he reached for my hand. I let him take it. I looked out the window and didn't let go. We stopped in a small coastal town, quiet, unassuming. We checked into a bed and breakfast that smelled of lavender and salt. The woman at the desk asked if we were celebrating something. He said yes. I didn't correct him. We walked through narrow streets, ate lunch by the water, shared a bottle of wine under a canvas umbrella. He asked me questions he'd never asked before about my childhood, my regrets, what I dreamed about when I couldn't sleep. I answered truthfully, not because I owed him anything, but because I wanted to hear myself speak honestly for once. He listened with a kind of focus I hadn't felt in years. He laughed at my sarcasm, challenged my cynicism, touched my knee beneath the table just often enough to keep me breathless. We didn't kiss again that day. We didn't touch beyond the casual, the public, but something built between us. Something steady and undeniable. That night, back at the inn, I stood in front of the mirror for a long time. I took off my dress slowly, looked at my reflection as if seeing myself for the first time. I heard him knock once softly on the door to the bedroom. I didn't answer right away. I pressed my fingers against my stomach, closed my eyes, felt the weight of every decision that had led me here. Eventually, I opened the door. He stood there silent. No smile, no words. I stepped aside and let him in. We didn't touch. We just sat at the edge of the bed, shoulders brushing. The air between us pulsed. "I don't want to ruin your life," he said suddenly. I turned to him. "Then don't." He looked at me for a long time. Then he said, "I want more." I didn't know if he meant more time, more of me, or something else entirely, but I nodded. And that night when we lay beside each other fully clothed, whispering fragments of ourselves into the darkness, I understood something I hadn't dared admit before. It wasn't about the physical. It never had been. It was about being known, seen, chosen. And in that small rented room, far from everything familiar, I felt like I belonged to something again. Not to him. Not to anyone. To myself.
It was supposed to be the last time.
That was the silent agreement, unspoken, but hovering in the spaces between our conversations. A weekend away, a brief escape, and then we would return to our separate lives. Me to my husband, to my routines, to the safety of structure. He did whatever version of normal waited for him after me. But even as we parted on Sunday, when he kissed the top of my hand instead of my lips and held the door open without touching the small of my back, I knew he had only opened a deeper door. By Monday morning, I had slipped back into the rhythm of my home life. The kettle boiled at 7:10. The washing machine spun at 8:15. The neighbor's dog barked at 9 like clockwork. But I felt myself moving through it all like a borrowed body. My gestures were correct. My smiles were automatic. My husband kissed my cheek, complimented my hair, asked if I wanted to plan something for the weekend. I said, "Let's see how the week goes." He didn't press, but the part of me that had opened in that quiet coastal town, the part that had breathed beside him in bed without needing to speak, refused to be closed. He'd left behind a version of myself I didn't know I'd needed, and now I carried it like a secret under my skin. 3 days passed in silence. No messages, no invitations. I didn't expect one. I had told myself I needed the distance. I folded it into myself like a clean white sheet, convincing, reassuring. But by Thursday, the silence had changed. It wasn't space anymore. It was weight, a growing, restless ache that settled in my spine and tightened with every hour he didn't reach out. That evening, I walked without purpose. I passed through streets I'd known for years, but they felt unfamiliar. The shops, the lampposts, the hedges trimmed just so. Everything seemed faded, like props in a life I no longer fully occupied. My heels clicked softly against the pavement as I made my way to the park. I didn't plan to go there. My feet just took me. I sat on a bench near the path beneath a row of bare-limbed trees. The wind carried the first hints of autumn, damp leaves, the faint scent of smoke from somewhere unseen. I pulled my coat tighter and sat still, listening to the occasional rustle of joggers, dogs, conversations floating by. And then I saw him. He wasn't walking toward me. He wasn't even looking in my direction. He stood at the edge of the pond, hands in his pockets, watching the water ripple with a kind of stillness that hurt to look at. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. But something must have told him. Some invisible thread. Some current of attention. He turned slowly, and our eyes met. He didn't smile. He walked over without hesitation, sat beside me like it had been arranged, like we hadn't left anything unfinished at all. "I didn't think I'd see you," he said. I looked at him uncertain. "Why are you here?" He shrugged. "I come here sometimes. Think you same." He turned his head to face me. "Liar." I let out a breath that could have been a laugh or a sob depending on how you listened. We sat there for a while, not speaking. The sun dipped lower, casting amber light across his face. He looked older in that light, not because of age, but because of something worn into his expression. A longing maybe, or a knowing. He broke the silence first. "I'm leaving. End of next week. Got a job offer in Denver." I felt something drop inside me like a stone in water. "For how long?" I asked. He shook his head. "Not sure. Maybe permanently." I looked away, my throat tightened. "That's soon." "I wasn't going to tell you. Thought it would make things easier." "Easier for who?" He didn't answer. Instead, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded note. He didn't hand it to me, just held it between his fingers. "If you want to see me again before I go," he said, placing the note on the bench between us, "it has to be your choice." I looked down at the note. The wind tugged at the edge of it, but I pressed my fingers over the corner to keep it still. He stood slowly, paused. "I don't regret any of it," he said. "But I don't want to be another thing you have to lie about." And then he walked away. I stared at the note. I didn't open it. Not right away. I stayed on that bench until the sky dimmed to violet and the lamps flickered on one by one. When I finally unfolded it, it was simple. An address, a time, and 3 words. No explanations needed. I put it in my coat pocket and walked home, slower than usual. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay next to my husband, listening to his steady breathing. I studied the shape of his hand where it rested on the blanket, the soft indentation of his wedding ring. I tried to remember the last time we'd stayed up late talking. The last time he touched me like he couldn't stop. I wondered if he ever noticed how much I'd disappeared while standing right next to him. In the morning, he kissed me goodbye before work. He asked if I wanted anything from the store. I said no. He left. And I sat at the kitchen table with the note in front of me, my fingers tracing the handwriting over and over like it might reveal something I hadn't yet seen. I didn't know if I would go, but I knew this. I couldn't pretend I hadn't seen him again. And I couldn't pretend it didn't matter. There are moments in life that don't arrive with ceremony. No thunderous skies, no gasping revelations, just the quiet knowledge that whatever happens next, you've already stepped past the point of return. That morning, sitting at the kitchen table with his note in front of me, I knew I had reached it. The paper felt warm between my fingers, as if it still carried the heat of his hand. The handwriting, familiar, sharp, slightly tilted, didn't shake. Mine would have. I read the address again, then the time. Saturday, 4 o'clock. Just one line. No sentiment, no request. A door left ajar, but not wide open. If I wanted to walk through it, it would be on my own terms. For most of the day, I moved as if underwater. I folded towels 3 times. Refold them twice more. I wandered from room to room with a mug of tea that had long gone cold.
I didn't cry.
I didn't panic. What I felt was something harder to define. Something closer to mourning. Not for what I was about to lose, but for the version of myself I could no longer be. I imagined not going. I rehearsed the explanation I'd give myself. I would say it had been real, but fleeting, a passing fever, something to hold in secret, but not pursue. I would return to the warmth of familiarity, the soft dimming of sensation, the quiet comfort of a marriage that had long ago settled into the shape of silence. I would truly try to forget what it felt like to be wanted without obligation. But the more I imagined that life, the more suffocated I became. That night, I sat in bed beside my husband. He read in silence, the lamp casting gentle shadows across his face. I watched his lips move slightly as he followed the lines of a page, his hand resting on his thigh, one finger tucked between chapters. I tried to remember what it felt like to touch him and not compare. I tried to summon the tenderness I knew we once had. And I found it, a memory distant, but intact. Our early years. His breath against my neck, his voice cracking when he whispered that he didn't deserve me. I turned off my light first, rolled onto my side. He followed minutes later, his arm brushing mine.
We didn't speak.
He kissed my shoulder absent-mindedly, already drifting. I lay awake, eyes wide open, listening to the rhythm of his breathing until the first light crept through the blinds. The next day was uneventful by design. I spent it moving through routine like choreography, grocery shopping, responding to messages, pausing at stoplights longer than necessary. I didn't look at the note again. I didn't have to. The address was already burned into me. When Saturday arrived, I told my husband I needed some time alone. I said I was going to visit an art exhibit. Maybe stop by a bookstore afterward. He kissed my temple. Take your time, he said, and I did. I drove out of town in silence. No music, no GPS. The road was familiar, even if the destination wasn't. My hands were steady on the wheel, but My stomach churned with something that wasn't nerves. It was need and the realization that this wasn't about him anymore. This was about me. The house sat low and quiet on the edge of a wooded path. Secluded but not remote. A rental, no doubt.
Temporary like us.
The gravel crunched under my tires as I pulled into the driveway. I sat there for a full minute, engine off, the key still in my hand. Then I got out. He opened the door before I knocked. We didn't speak, not right away. He stepped aside, and I walked past him into a room lit by filtered afternoon light. A modest space, a couch, a few books stacked on the table, a bag half-zipped near the window. He hadn't made it look lived in. He hadn't tried to romanticize it. That comforted me. He stood behind me for a moment, not touching, just breathing. "I didn't think you'd come," he said finally. "I almost didn't. But you did." I turned to face him. Yes. The silence between us felt different now. Not heavy, not uncertain, just full of everything we didn't have to say anymore. I sat on the edge of the couch and he joined me, leaving a measured distance. His hand rested on the cushion between us. Open.
Palm down.
An offering, not a demand. "I don't know what this means," I said. "Me neither. I don't know what happens after today. I won't ask you to." We sat like that for a while. The weight of our presence enough. Eventually, I leaned back, exhaling slowly. "I've never done this before," I said.
Lit.
Number chosen myself. That made him smile, soft, almost sad. He reached over then, finally, taking my hand in his. His thumb moved lightly over the edge of my wrist, the same way he'd once touched my jaw in the kitchen, back when none of this had yet happened. "I want you to know," he said, "that this doesn't have to become something else to matter." "It already matters," I said. "That's the problem." He kissed me. Not urgent, not hungry, just sure. And I kissed him back. Later, we lay on the couch, legs entangled, not speaking. My head on his chest, his fingers brushing my arm in long, quiet strokes. We didn't talk about the future. We didn't talk about goodbyes. We just existed together, suspended. At some point, he asked if I wanted to stay the night. I shook my head. "I need to go home."
He didn't argue.
He walked me to my car, his hand at the small of my back like it had always belonged there. The sky had turned the color of bruised fruit, dark and ripe. I opened the door, paused, looked up at him. "Will you call me?" I asked. "If you want me to." I didn't answer. I just got in, closed the door, and drove. That night, I returned to my house. To the porch light still on. To the husband who waited with a soft kiss and a question about dinner. I answered him. I smiled. I asked about his day. I slipped into bed beside him, body still carrying the warmth of someone else's breath. And for the first time, I didn't feel torn. I felt whole, even if just for a moment. I once believed that returning meant undoing. That if I came home, stepped back into this life, this house, this marriage, I would somehow erase what had happened. As if the absence of him could cleanse the presence of us. But I know better now. You don't return the same. You carry things back with you. Quiet things, unseen things. A glance, a heat, the shape of a name you no longer say aloud. And somehow you manage to fit them into the small spaces between making the bed and pouring the morning coffee, like contraband in your chest. The following days were the most ordinary I had lived in months. They were also the most unbearable. The kitchen smelled of basil and dish soap. The radio hummed its usual soft news. My husband asked about books I hadn't read, movies I hadn't watched. I responded with nods, half answers, well-placed smiles. I didn't lie, not in the traditional sense. I simply let the silences speak louder than the truth. But in the quiet, I carried the last image of him, standing in the doorway of that rented house, his hand still warm from mine, his face too still, as if memorizing something he didn't dare ask me to give. I hadn't told him not to call. I also hadn't told him to.
He didn't.
I told myself it was better this way. We had said what needed to be said. The moment had passed, or at least it had settled, like dust in a room long undisturbed. One afternoon, My husband found me sitting outside with a glass of wine long after sunset. He stepped onto the porch, leaned against the railing, watching me for a moment in silence. "You've changed," he said quietly. I looked up.
How?
"I don't know. Just you're quieter. Not sad. Just somewhere else." I didn't answer. I didn't know how to. I wanted to tell him everything and nothing all at once. That he hadn't done anything wrong. That I had simply unraveled in the absence of something I hadn't known I was missing until I felt it again.
He sat beside me.
His hand found mine. "I know I've let things drift," he said. "I thought you liked the quiet. I thought we were okay." "We were," I said. "And maybe we still are." He nodded. "I just don't want to lose you." I turned to him. He looked tired, but not from age or work. From trying to find something in me that I no longer wore on the outside. "You haven't lost me," I said. And it wasn't a lie. But he hadn't fully found me either, because I didn't belong in just one place anymore. I belonged in moments. In the way I chose my lingerie, now with intention. Even when no one would see it. In the way I walked into a room, aware of my own body. Not for how it looked, but for how it felt. In the way I touched my husband, not out of duty, but out of choice. Deliberate and slow, even if my mind sometimes flickered elsewhere. I made love to him the following night. Gently, with more presence than I had in months. He cried after, not sobbing. Just silent tears that welled up and rolled down. He held me tighter than usual, as if he too understood something had shifted that neither of us could name. I didn't stop him. I let him hold me. I let him believe whatever story he needed to believe. And afterward, I stood in the bathroom alone, the mirror catching only the edges of my body. I didn't hate myself. Crisp and curling at the edges. I passed the bench we'd shared and sat down without thinking. No one was waiting for me, but I felt him there. Not beside me. Not in some romantic, ghostly way, but in the space inside me that had opened when he first said, "Careful driving." I whispered barely loud enough for the wind to carry. "Thank you." Not for the affair, but for returning me to myself. Even if just for a while. Even if only once.